group here. My name is Jeff Cantor. I am one of your advisors and also CAC, Chair of the Advisory Committee. Thank you very much for staying a little bit later here. This will be helpful and useful to you, but we are also recording this session so it can be used first by Region R, which the chapters up in New England states, but Region P will probably make use of it as well, to have little virtual workshops. So folks who can't attend sectional conferences or regional conferences, or who need some education on a different subject outside of when those events are scheduled, can look at these things online. So what I'm going to do is give you an overview of parliamentary procedure and how we run meetings. This is the newest 12th edition of Robert's Rules of Order. We will be covering this entire book in the next 20 minutes. No, I'm kidding. We're going to cover some of the things that you need to know and some of the basic things. I apologize, I'm going to be a little bit disjointed here because this setup doesn't give me a presenter view and I don't remember exactly what's on what slide. So, audience participation. What is parliamentary procedure? No, go on.
So the Parliament succeeds.
We have a comic, I love it. What is it used for? What does it help us with? What does it do?
Make meetings run more efficient and orderly.
Okay, what else does it do?
Run election.
Helps you to run specific operations like elections or voting on decisions you need to make. What else does parliamentary procedure do? No cheating, no Googling it. One of the key things that it does is it allows, in a large group like this, everyone to be heard, but the majority decision and opinion to be found and then followed. And that is important. A set of rules to conduct meetings allows you to make decisions. You're voting on elections and things like that. Allows everyone to be heard is very important. And it also defines how an organization operates. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but another major part of parliamentary procedure is bylaws and organizational structure. That's another lecture. I can come back and give that at some other time. How does it help a chapter? Some of your previous answers sort of alluded to this. How is it going to help your chapter?
Makes it more orderly and organized.
Yes, and I will compliment you guys. You run some of the best, most efficient meetings I have seen in the fraternity in quite some time. So in many ways, you don't need this. Thank you for bearing with me. What else does it help you do?
Level sets the expectation of like how things are supposed to be running.
Very important. Everyone in the room knows how things are supposed to run and what's supposed to happen. So it's not just the person up front running the meeting or the executive board, the officers. Everyone has an understanding and expectation of what's going to happen. Very important. So you guys hit these things run efficiently, ensures that decisions are made well, and it will assist voting delegates at our national conventions. Our national convention isn't until December of 2023. Does anyone happen to know where it's going to be? Has already been announced. It's going to be in Indianapolis, Indiana. And in 2025, our 100th anniversary, we will be right down the road in Philadelphia. Everyone should know some of the basic procedures, and that's the idea of what we're talking about today. Basic elements: meetings, minutes, very important, decision-making, the motions and the process and how you go about voting, nominations and elections, and then the organizational structure, which I mentioned a minute ago. We're not going to talk about it much tonight, but the organizational structure, which is your bylaws, how the organization is set up, and finally, the parliamentary authority, which in a nutshell is this book right here. So, first thing with meetings is decorum. The chair runs the meeting. Now, Lily is your president right now, so she's been the one who's running the meeting. President is normally the one who runs the meeting, but they can delegate that authority to anyone they want within reason or within what's prescribed in the chapter's bylaws. Anyone can speak. but only after being recognized by the chair. So we don't have crosstalk, we don't have people talking over each other or whatnot, so that everyone can hear and everyone can be heard. Again, I'll keep stressing those points. It's very important that that information exchange can occur. We can limit how long people talk. How many of us know someone who talks too much?
I do, my dad.
You don't have to name names, we're not trying to out anyone here. So we all know folks who like to hear themselves talk. Parliamentary procedure, Robert's rules do give us procedures to limit what's called limit debate. To say, okay, for this discussion, no one can speak longer than 2 minutes at a time. We can also limit it to how often the person may speak. You've probably seen discussions where there are 10 people in the room, but the same 2 people keep talking. That's good for a little bit, but after a while, we need to either hear other voices or move on to making a decision because all the information has been shared. And then we have an agenda, which is very important. That's what keeps things organized. So let's talk about the agenda. What's on the agenda? What has to be part of every meeting of the chapter? You guys do most of this, so come on, call them out.
Any new business that you have to discuss?
Okay, new business,
Important events that anyone needs
or
to know?
events or announcements. Yeah, what else?
Questions?
Hmm?
Questions that members might have?
Chance for people to ask questions. What other things do you have to have?
Song.
That is a custom and a tradition that we do in this organization. And yes, I think it's very important for our fellowship. But from a, I'll say, legal perspective, it's not required. What do we need to have?
Discussion?
Discussion goes along with the other 2 points. That's what you call it, but it covers the answering questions and making announcements of things. Key things. What were most of the slides up here? Officer reports. You must hear from your officers. Interesting piece of trivia. What is the one officer report that must be made at every meeting? Treasurer. Follow the money. You as the executive board and the officers have a fiduciary responsibility to manage the money, among other things, and that belong to the chapter. And hearing from the treasurer about the state of the chapter's treasury and what's going on with that, when dues are due and things like that, must be included. I used to have a president's report, not required. I used to have a membership VP report, not required. Must hear from the treasurer. What's one other thing we need? Committee reports. There are a couple other important sort of, I'll call them legislative or legal things. Formally, the meeting needs to be called to order, and then at the end, it needs to adjourn. We need a reading and approval of the minutes. Now, that doesn't necessarily need to happen in the meeting. You can have a process outside of that to cover that. We'll get to that in a minute. So officer reports, committee reports, special orders, which would be special things that are on the agenda for that meeting only. That's a pretty rare occurrence. Old business, anything that you started discussing at the last meeting, need to finish on and vote on. Again, for normal fraternity functions, that doesn't happen very often. There's usually just new business comes up, you discuss it, you vote on it, you're done with it. Why do we take minutes?
So there's like a shortened kind of cut and dry list of everything that was talked about that was important without any of the in-between side conversations, less important information, etc.
You're recording secretary?
No, I'm.
Because that's the perfect definition. Yes, the minutes are the legal record of what happened at your meeting. Now, most of your meetings are filled with the officer reports, committee reports. You guys then share the slide deck, which had all of that information with everyone. So that's how that is conveyed to folks. If you had a decision that was being made, let's say you were voting on a budget or voting on spending money for a particular project, the minutes would be very important to record not, as she said, every little detail of the discussion, but what the original motion was for, say, how much money, what if any amendments were offered, and whether, and the result of the votes that were taken. Did the initial amount get amended up or down? Was that successful? Was the overall motion successful? So that's a very important part of the minutes. The official record is the legal record of what is going on. It also allows anyone who wasn't at the meeting to stay abreast of what's going on, so that they attend the next meeting, they know what happened when they weren't there. And I sort of covered this. It's a record of what was decided, as she said, decided, not what was said. At each meeting, you read the minutes. No one does that anymore, especially not with all the electronics and technology we have. Minutes are posted. In your case, you post the slide deck. Everyone has a chance to look through that. If you were making a decision, you were voting on something, there would be a section in there describing, again, as I said, what was voted on and what the decision was. If someone had any corrections, they would reach out to the recording secretary and say, hey, you know, the order that you have the different amendments is incorrect. I think it happened this way, and that could get corrected. And then they would be, once everyone has made any corrections that need to be made, they're published so that everyone has access, and then approved or whatever. All right, so decision making. All decisions that the chapter makes, and again, most of your meetings are more informative. You're getting the reports, you're not making that many decisions. You have elections periodically, you have some budgetary issues to vote on, but most of the time you're not dealing with this. But when you do, all of this happens through motions. There are 4 types. Main motion is 99% of what you're going to focus on. The main motion is, I move that we spend $50 on decorations for the formal coming up. That's a main motion. Your subsidiary privileges and incidental motions are side motions that you've probably heard people make a point of information, point of order, to ask questions, to check, make sure that the process is being done correctly, and to deal with issues within the room. You know, if someone in the back can't hear because the speaker's mumbling and not talking, they're going to raise their hand and, you know, point of order, I can't hear. That needs to be taken care of first so that people can hear everything that's being said and focus on the main motion. So the main motion is the business we're trying to do, but it actually, as we'll see in a minute, is one of the last things in order of precedence in parliamentary procedure. The motion introduces the topic we're going to discuss. You can't introduce something else or something new when something else is still being discussed. So we deal with one main motion at a time. If there's an amendment to that main motion, the discussion moves entirely to that amendment. So if the motion was to spend $50 for decorations for the formal, and someone moves to amend that to $75, the discussion now is entirely on the difference between 50 and 75, not on whether we should spend money on decorations at all. That's no longer relevant. That's no longer appropriate. Once we discuss 75 versus 50 and vote on it one way or the other, then we go back to, should we spend money on decorations at all? It sounds very harsh, and for a financial decision like that, where it's pretty cut and dried, it's seems a little bit clunky. But when you're dealing with much more complicated issues, it's important to keep that structure going so that you can focus on the merits of whatever the amendment is and not get caught up in the main motion discussion until the amendment is decided. Subsidiary motions would be amendments, as I was mentioning. They are voted on prior to the main motion. We can't decide if we're going to spend money if we haven't decided whether we're spending $50 or $75. We have to do that first. Privilege motions, things that are not related to the main motion. They usually need to be dealt with beforehand, this would be the person in the back who maybe can't hear, or someone who's distracted by it being too cold or too hot in the room or something like that. Include points of privilege, asking for a recess, maybe there's construction going on, it's really noisy, let's have a recess so we can get that noise quieted down and then come back. There's nothing. Incidental motions deal with issues of procedure. Point of order, point of information, to get more information from the chair or from people who originally proposed the original motion. Again, you can't make a good decision if you don't have all of the facts in front of you. This is how you can go about getting it. How motions work. Probably all seen this in movies or on TV and whatnot. As I said, I move that we allocate $50 for decorations at the formal. It then needs to be seconded. Someone needs to second that. Why do we do that? Why do we move and second a motion?
So basically seconding is just, I agree with this, let's continue. So it's another form of continuation to make it more smooth, but you're motioning to move on from this topic to another topic. It's similar to an essay.
And it also means that one person can't dominate the meeting with their harebrained idea. I move that we do something really crazy. No one seconds it. The motion's not in order. We can't discuss it. We can't waste time on that silly idea. The second means there's at least one other person in the group who wants to discuss that topic. That's the purpose of it. It prevents the meeting from being derailed by some crazy harebrained idea. So if you be careful to don't listen to what's being said before you jump up and second something. You don't want to be the one who locks the chapter into a half-hour discussion on something frivolous because you seconded someone's really kind of crazy, poorly thought out idea. Most of the things that you guys are going to deal with are not crazy things, so seconding is fine. It's then repeated by the chair. This is important, especially in a large group, to make sure that everyone hears what's going on. This room isn't quite big enough for this to be an issue, but if you're a really large, much larger room, the chair might very well have a microphone, but the rest of you don't. So the chair can hear you say, I move to do this, and this person seconds it, but the rest of the room didn't hear it. So then the chair repeats the motion so that everyone heard what is being said. It also makes sure that the person who proposed the motion, they can check and make sure the chair understood it correctly. The chair misstates it, they can say, no, that's not what I said. Because you don't want the chair running the discussion thinking that the motion was worded one way when in fact the person intended something else. The chair will say, it's been moved and seconded that we spend $50 on decorations. We then debate. The person who made the motion gets the right to speak first, and then debate opens up to whomever raises their hand or steps up, whatever the procedure might be in the group, depending on the group size. The chair will point to people, very much like how you run the discussion. The person who is chairing that part of the meeting points out whoever they see as the next person in line to speak. Once the debate is over, and there are a whole bunch of ways that that can happen, and I'm not going to go into the details here, we're ready to vote. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We tally the vote. Voice vote is the most common, but we'll talk about different voting procedures in a minute. I meant to talk a little bit about order of precedence of the different motions, and you'll notice the main motion is way down there at the bottom. So that discussion that we really want to talk about, spending $50 on decorations at the formal, can be interrupted by anything else. And that seems backwards. You would think that's the business we're here to talk about. We would want to talk about that most. But all of these other things are distracting someone from paying attention and participating in that discussion. question of privilege. They can't hear, they're too cold, they're too hot, they want to complain about something. I mean, it should be a frivolous complaint, but if it's something that's keeping that person from participating in a discussion, that needs to be resolved first, so that they can go back to focusing on the main motion. If there may be a need to, this is a really complicated situation, maybe it's better to have, instead of the whole group spending hours talking about it, form a committee and have that committee discuss it. Or, as would tend to happen in a chapter, refer it back to a standing committee that already exists and have that committee report at the next meeting what they think should be done on that topic. So we can deal with all of those other things, get them out of the way, and then come back and focus on the main motion. I've sort of touched on a couple of these. Ways of voting. Voice vote is the default and the most common, and pretty much the one that you should use, I would say 98% of the time, with the exception of elections and possibly a very sensitive topic, but someone could move to change the voting procedure for that topic. Next would be a show of hands. This can be used if the voice vote sounds very balanced. The chair says, I'm not sure what happened. Everyone raise their hand, makes it a little bit easier to determine what the vote is. The next formal voting method is a counted standing vote. And the reason we go to standing instead of just raising your hand, group this size is not too difficult, but at our national conventions, we are 400 or 500 voting delegates. Counting everyone's hands can take 5 to 10 minutes. Most of us can't hold our hand up like this for more than about a minute or two before it hurts. It's a lot easier to stand for 5 minutes. So a large group, have everyone stand, count the people voting in favor, they sit down, everyone who votes no stands, count that. I'll skip over roll call for a minute. Ballot vote, you're familiar with, that's usually how our elections are done. General consent, or by act. This can only happen if there is no objection. It is usually only used in elections when there is a single candidate running. Instead of going through the process of handing out ballots for everyone to write down the same name, the chair can ask if there's general consent that we elect this person to this office because they're running unopposed, but there must be no objection. If anyone objects, you must vote. That person objecting may not mean that they are going to vote against the person. It just means that they want the ballot process to go through, with the formal voting process to go through. I'm going to come back to roll call. You'll see this used in governmental legislative bodies, in House of Representatives, in Senate, in state legislative bodies. That is done so that the voting record of each member of that assembly can be recorded and made public. For our purposes, it's really not something that is ever necessary. And if it's a somewhat sensitive issue, it's probably going to cause far more problems than it's going to solve, because now everyone's vote is recorded in the minutes for posterity, and that can make people quite uncomfortable. If you've ever run into a situation where you really think you want to do a roll call vote, call me. We'll talk about it. The bylaws can determine what method is used, but in most cases, your bylaws are simply going to say a voice vote unless the body decides otherwise at that time. Nominations and elections, last thing I want to cover here. There's no required way to run elections. Your bylaws may have some specific procedures which you need to follow. Some chapters will use a nominating committee, others will nominate from the whole body as a whole, and only take nominations there, as it says, from the floor. It is usually best, and your bylaws probably require this, that you spread your election process, your nomination selection process, over at least 2 meetings. You have nominations at one meeting, then the following week, you reopen nominations, so people who weren't there, or people who wanted to think about it a little bit more, people who wanted to go talk to someone and try and twist someone's arm to run for an office, can do that, and we can add more names to the list of nominations, and then we can move into the actual election process. It is often customary, at least in Alpha Phi Omega, to allow candidates to make a short speech. Your bylaws may or may not require that, allow for it, prohibit it, read your bylaws. Unless the bylaws prohibit it, it's up to the chapter at that time whether you want to do it. I think it's generally a good idea. You can limit those speeches to a minute or two so you don't spend all day doing it. When you vote, and you keep going until all the offices are filled. As it says, typically that'll span a few meetings. And lastly, parliamentary authority, that's the guide that you're going to refer to if any questions come up. As I said, Alpha Phi Omega, we pretty much always use Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. The 12th edition is the most current, that's 2020. They publish a new one every 8 to 10, 15 years, something like that. This one finally has a full section on virtual meetings. Gee, I wonder why. But there is another well-known one out there, Sturgis. For 99.9% of day-to-day things, the two guides are going to say exactly the same thing. The differences are in the minutia that you're not going to be dealing with. Few resources. The National Association of Parliamentarians has a lot of excellent online resources, because this book is not expensive, but it's a lot to try and go through and digest. They have several 1 or 2 page guides, tables that give you most of the information. The American Institute of Parliamentarians also has some good information. Within the fraternity itself, the national bylaws and standard chapter articles of association are excellent resources when you're looking at your bylaws, chapter structure. And the APO Impact has a series of parliamentary resources. And I've caught the QR code bug. If any of you have any questions or whatnot, that will take you to my email. Send me a quick email. And if the video that was being taken, any of you recorded this, I would appreciate it if you could send me the video to that address. Any questions? Thank you all for your patience.